So today we're giving a very broad overview of different types of financial aid, how to apply to financial aid, so the applications that are available, some factors that determine how much money you'll get, right? A vast majority of people who go to UCs and Cal States, at least, they end up getting a lot or some aid, private universities as well, actually. But how much money you will get will depend on a couple of factors, so we'll go over those. We might, if we have time, we might do a detailed look at financial aid packages, but if not, we'll probably post it on our website so you can learn more about it. And then we'll do a quick exit survey so we know how we're doing, and you can let us know if you have any comments or questions. All right, so let's get started. Presenters, so my name is Arabi. If you're attending the workshop for the first time, or if you haven't seen me before, welcome. So I graduated from UC Berkeley last year as a sociology major, and afterwards I received a grant from UC Berkeley to run the First Gen Empowerment Project. So I've been doing that for the past year. It initially started at Van Nuys High School, but now because everything is online with the school shutting down, we have decided to offer these workshops and our services to all high schools in California. So if you know any friends or anyone else who are attending high schools, please feel free to tell them to register for future workshops as well. And presenting with me is also Kamal, who can introduce himself.
Hi everyone, I'm Kamal. I just graduated from Penn this last year, and I study neuroscience nutrition science. I'm currently enrolled in a master's program in Taiwan, but I decided to really join this project because I also was a first generation college student, and for me, the adaptation from high school to college was extremely rough, and now I've learned a lot and really want to give back. But I'm really glad to be here, and I hope you all learned something from this workshop.
Great. Oh yeah, I also forgot to mention I'm starting law school in the fall. So if anyone has any questions about how to get to law school, what it's like to be a lawyer, which I don't know, but I can do my best to help you. Okay, cool. Thank you, Kamal. All right. So financial aid is a combination of basically any money you receive to attend college. So it can come from, so some types of financial aid include grants, scholarships, loans, work study, which means you work on campus to receive money that pays towards your housing or your tuition, and also school specific, which means that your university might decide to give you some money to do research or to be a teaching assistant, something like that. So money, financial aid can come from all sorts of different sources. And in addition to these, it can come from state aid. So if you live in California, the California government gives out financial aid, and they're called Cal Grants. It can also mean federal aid. So if you might have heard of Pell Grants, which is money that comes from the federal government to pay for college. Universities and colleges will give out their own scholarships. So if you attend CSUN or UCLA, so UCLA and CSUN might give you scholarships depending on a whole wide range of factors that we'll talk about later. And then there's also private donors. So sometimes there are private foundations, so like companies, organizations, usually philanthropists, like rich, wealthy people who have these foundations set up to give money to students. They will work with universities to identify students and give them scholarships as well. So again, money comes from a lot of different sources. So don't think of financial aid as one big chunk of money. It's usually tiny chunks of money that come from different places. So I want to talk about different types of aid so you understand what they mean and how to receive them. So first of all, grants, they're a type of financial aid that don't need to be repaid. So it's just that's free money. Grants are often need-based. That means that it's dependent on your or your family's income, but it can also be merit-based or student-specific. Merit-based means that it can be based on your GPA, your maybe your SAT score, depending on the school. It can also mean like your extracurricular activities, your personal background, all sorts of different things. It's usually offered by the federal or state government, so federal government or California, and private universities themselves. So when I went to Berkeley, I received Cal Grants, which covered all of my tuition to go to Berkeley, and that was my main source of financial aid. So some grant examples, again, there's Pell Grants, there's Cal Grants, Penn Grants. So if you were to go to University of Pennsylvania, you would receive a Penn Grant. And usually each university has something similar to that. Okay, and there are scholarships, which I feel like most people, when you think of financial aid, this is what you think of. It's another type of financial aid that does not need to be paid back. So it's free money, not a loan. It's typically merit-based or student-specific. That means that usually scholarships are dependent on the things I talked about, like your personal background, leadership activities, extracurriculars, your GPA, your SAT scores. But it can also there are scholarships that will ask you to verify your income because it's income based. So they want to give it to people who really need the money. Scholarships can come from universities or private organizations, and you often have to apply for scholarships, and there's usually an essay component. This is not always the case. So, for example, when you turn in your UC application, there's a whole scholarship section where you tick off like different personal affiliations, like, oh, do you live in Southern California or do you live in Northern California? These are some examples. And based on what you put, they might offer you a scholarship. That one doesn't require an additional essay, but there are a ton of scholarships that do. And we'll talk more about that in our scholarships workshop. So some popular scholarships you might have heard of: the Gates Millennium Scholarship, the Coca-Cola Scholarship, Bright Minds, Flynn Family, Horatio Altus. Like, these are just some examples of possibly millions of scholarships that are out there. And there's definitely like billions of dollars worth of scholarships that are just out there for people to apply to, that comes from all sorts of different sources. So then work study is a federal program, and it basically allows you to work part-time on campus while you're attending college, and you make money to pay for college. It's flexible scheduling and convenient for students. So I had a friend who did work study. He would go to class, and then he would work an hour-long shift at the library, and then he would go to his next class and then work another hour-long shift. So usually with a regular job at like Starbucks or something, you definitely can't do that, right? So colleges will work with you to create a really flexible schedule. Depending on your campus, it might be on campus specifically, or it could also be like off campus with a nonprofit organization or something. Work study examples include research assistant, which is what I did when I was in Berkeley. You can be a social media programming intern. You could be a library work study, which is super popular. You could also work in the dining halls and like serve people food, stuff like that. You could be a mentor, a caller. So I know I have friends who used to work in the alumni relations office. So their job was to call up people who have already graduated and ask them if they're willing to donate. That's a work study job. So a lot of things on campus are usually run by students because that's their part-time job. Loans. This should be your very last option after you have exhausted all of your free money options. So it's borrowed money that you have to pay back with interest. It's used to cover cost of education that's not covered by grants and scholarships. It can be taken, usually the most popular form of loans is federal loans. So the federal government will give you loans. It can also come from private banks. And sometimes universities will give you your own loans. So it depends on where you go. So for example, so most people I know get federal loans, but if you're undocumented in California, you don't qualify for federal loans at all. Like you don't qualify for any federal programs, but the California government will give you loans to cover your education. So that's an option. So for the vast majority of people though, loans come from the federal government. Some examples are federal subsidized loan, unsubsidized loan, private loans from Wells Fargo, Sallie Mae. Be careful with private loans. Those have way higher interest rates than federal loans, which means that you end up paying more towards those loans than you would with federal loans. So that's a longer conversation. I urge you to do your own research, but if you have any specific questions, you can email us as well or ask us in the chat box. So types of loans, like we talked about, federal loans, lower interest rates than private loans. And subsidized just means that the government pays your interest while you're in college and for 6 months after you graduate. Those are the good ones, kind of, which just means that you don't have to your loans don't start accruing right away. Unsubsidized means that it already starts accruing interest when you get it while you were still in college. And then private loans, eligibility is based on your credit score, and interest rates are often high, like I said earlier. Okay. So I want to talk about some financial aid options for UCs specifically. So these are just a couple that are really popular. There's a lot more out there. So there's one called California Dream Loan Program, which is for undocumented students in California who can borrow loans. So I talked about that earlier. And it's a maximum of $4,000. So it's not a lot, but it's still better than nothing. And usually what happens is that loan is offered for people who get a lot of aid to begin with, like they get Cal grants and scholarships, but they still need a couple more $1,000. That's where this loan comes in. There is a middle class scholarship, which is a state grant that's given to families over $80,000 and upwards of $177,000. If you make less than $80,000, or your family does, your tuition is covered. You're going to get Cal grants, basically, for sure. Like, UCs make sure that you're getting money from somewhere if you make less than $80,000. So good thing. And then if you make more than that, that's where the middle class scholarship comes in. There is a Blue and Gold Opportunity Plan, which is tuition and fees will be covered by gift aid for 4 years. That's the one I was talking about. So basically, this is saying that if your income is below $80,000, you will get financial aid to cover at least your tuition for 4 years while you're at a UC. And you can apply for all of these through FAFSA or the California Dream Act, which we'll talk about later. CSU program, so for the Cal States, it's very similar, but the names are different. So there's one called Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. It's just additional grants to cover the remaining costs that you might need to, let's say, get an apartment or like pay for your personal expenses. There's a CSU Foundation Scholarship. There's a whole bunch of them, and you can get them based on your achievements or your interests. State university grant, it's need-based, so it's based on your family's income. You're automatically considered for it when you apply for FAFSA or the California Dream Act. So this is basically, if you don't end up getting Cal grants or anything else, this money will kick in. My point with all of this is to say there's so many different sources of financial aid. Even if you don't get one of them, you'll likely end up getting another one. So there is no excuse not to apply. That really is what you should be getting from this. There is so much money out there to make education affordable, especially for students who really can't afford it otherwise. You absolutely need to apply. For students who want to go to community colleges, you might have heard of the Promise Grant, which is community college is free for 2 years if you go full-time and you're a first-time student. And it only covers tuition, so it doesn't cover like textbook costs, or if you end up living, let's say, on an apartment close to community college, it's not going to cover those costs. But then that's why the other money that I talked about, other grants like Pell Grants and Cal Grants, those kick in to help cover your remaining costs of like transportation, textbooks, and stuff like that. You also apply for this with the FAFSA or the California Dream Act. Everything gets processed through these two applications, and so those are the two names that you really need to know. And we'll talk more about whether you should apply to one or the other later. Okay, so private school funding. Kamal, do you want to talk about this?
Yes. So for private school funding, private schools are a little bit unique. So while there are very different grants available for UCs, private schools essentially aren't, each school is very specific, and each school is its own entity and has a different way that it operates. And private schools are known for being more expensive in terms of there is a larger tuition that they charge, but that's usually matched by a lot more grant and aid that they're able to provide. And in fact, a lot of private schools offer no loan and debt-free policies. So within their financial aid package, they'll provide you, although they may require you to pay the amount that's seen as your family contribution or expected family contribution, they won't charge you anything more. So they won't provide you any loans or any sort of grant that requires you to pay them back, but they will always provide you grants and scholarships to fulfill the gap. So many private schools have large endowments, which leads to these large financial aid packages. And then some private schools are even able to match the financial aid like a UC or a CSU gives you. So the great thing with getting to private schools is oftentimes, if you get another school that gives you a lot of aid, if a private school wants you, they'll match that aid. And that goes even for some graduate programs as well. Except given that they provide your own aid and they're able to match the aid of other schools, they usually require more out of you. So they might require an application called the CSS Profile, and we're going to talk more about that. But just so you know more about what kind of schools fall into private schools, which private schools offer great aid, you should check out the Coalition for College, which is a great website for first-generation college students and low-income college students, to find out more about which private schools offer robust aid and which private schools are able to ensure that you can be graduating essentially debt-free.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I know a lot of students are afraid of private schools because they think they're not going to get financial aid. That might be the case, but it might not be. You might end up getting really good financial aid. So yeah, check out Coalition for College to see what type of aid you might get. and apply to the schools that you're interested in. You really never know. Financial aid can be kind of unpredictable, especially when it comes to scholarships, because they're not awarded based on like income or anything. For the most part, it's based on so many other factors. You might end up getting a really amazing scholarship to cover most of your cost of attendance. FAFSA, or the California Dream Act, are the two main types of financial aid applications. And you don't apply for both. You should never apply for both. It's usually one or the other. You apply for FAFSA if you're a US citizen, if you have a green card, or you meet any of these requirements. So if you don't know, well, if you were born in the United States, you're good. You're applying for FAFSA. If you know you have a green card, you're also good. You are definitely applying for FAFSA. But for the other ones, if you don't know, if you were not born in the United States, but you don't know what your citizenship status is, this is a good time to ask your parents or your guardians, because this is really important for financial aid. The California Dream Act is for students who are widely, like very broadly considered undocumented. This can mean that you have DACA. It can mean that you have a U visa, temporary protective status, all of these different requirements. And the other requirement is you have gone to a high school in California or a community college in California for 3 years. And you've received either a diploma from high school or like a GED, associate's degree, something of that sort, or you have met minimum transfer requirements to go from a community college to a UC. So for you, most of you, I'm assuming based on the registration list that everyone or most everyone who's attending these workshops are currently in high school. If you are in high school and you're going to be graduating from high school, no matter which one, somewhere in California, and you're undocumented, you can apply for the California Dream Act. You shouldn't even think about FAFSA. The only reason you should ask your parents or guardian about your citizenship status is to clarify what it is. A lot of students don't actually know what their citizenship status is beyond the fact that they weren't born here or they were born here. So have the conversation with your parents or guardians, explain to them that you need to know this to get money for college. And then based on that, you can apply for FAFSA or the California Dream Act. There is a link, like an online assessment that will tell you whether you're eligible for the California Dream Act. And I will share that on the website at a later time. So you can go back and check that. It'll be part of this presentation. But this is really important because if you're undocumented, you really shouldn't be applying for FAFSA. It's kind of a security concern. I don't think anything's going to happen, but you don't want to share that information with the federal government. I think it's just it's a security thing. Okay, so CSS Profile. This is the one, you only have to fill this out for private universities. Kamal, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So what exactly is a CSS profile? So for private schools, you do still have to apply for the FAFSA or for the DREAM application. And the CSS profile is an additional application. So why do you need to fill out an additional application? The reason why is because private schools have their own collection of scholarships and grants. So the CSS profile is a way for you to have access to them. So who acquires it? It's used by nearly 400 colleges, universities, professional schools, and scholarship programs to provide more than 9 billion grants. You fill it out? You fill it out because you want to get funding outside of FAFSA. So this is like universities' own grants and own scholarships, which are usually large amounts of money. And the CSS profile is just a little bit more in depth than the FAFSA. And it allows you to explain very specific circumstances where you can talk more about like particular instances during the school year where maybe your aid changes really drastically. During undergrad, I know I had to request the university to adjust my aid just because something happened in my family and needed that adjustment. And you fill it out via College Board. So like all the applications we talked about, all of them can be filled out online. I believe there still is a paper application if that's what you really want to look for, and you can look into that. But you can fill out all these applications online, and for the CSS profile specifically, you fill it out via College Board. And yes, that's the same website you use for the SAT and for your AP exams. And one of the weird things with CSS profile, which definitely turned me off when I was filling it out, is that it does require fee waivers. Otherwise, it has a cost. But the great thing is for a lot of the students who are going to be in the presentation, if you previously qualified for SAT fee waiver, the CSS profile is free for you. As well as you can get exemptions based on your parents' income and family size, or if you're an orphan award of the court. So definitely look into this, and it might be a little bit jarring because if you're applying for private schools, sometimes other teachers and counselors aren't necessarily used to the CSS profile, but it's fairly straightforward and there's a lot of assistance in the application. So if you don't know what it's asking for, there's a lot of information in the website to figure out how to obtain the numbers. But again, it's done. So it's basically a mega scholarship application that you submit to the university, and then the university will basically search for for scholarships that match you and hand them over to you. Think of it that way. Think about you're just filling out one application, so they do the rest of the work and give you the money.
Yep. So just to clarify, Kamal, as he mentioned before, if you're applying to private universities, you are filling out the CSS profile in addition to FAFSA or the California Dream Act. Also note about the California Dream Act, it only applies to colleges in California, so inside of California. That's it. For FAFSA and the CSS profile, it goes for colleges basically all over the country, and it might even be internationally, but the California Dream Act is specifically for California. Also, how can I obtain fee waivers? I know a lot of you are from Van Nuys High School or schools that are in the area. If your school gives you free lunch, as in you don't pay for lunch at school, you get a fee waiver automatically. That's an option when you apply for a fee waiver. It will ask you if you qualify for a free or reduced lunch program, and you have to check that, and if you do, you're going to get a fee waiver, because that's a sign that that school is low income by federal standards, and College Board has decided every student in that school gets fee waivers. And this includes to apply for CSS Profile, but also to send your SAT scores, send your AP scores, register for the SAT, stuff like that. So it's a really good perk you should make use of. You really shouldn't be paying for anything that College Board provides because they have so many fee waivers. Okay, so how do you apply for aid? For FAFSA, you go online to fafsa.gov. For the California Dream Act, you go to dream.csac.ca.gov, CSS Profile at College Board's website, and eligibility will be determined through these applications. And applications, depending on, probably CSS Profile as well, but FAFSA and the California Dream Act both open on October 1st, and the deadline is March 2nd of the year you're going to college. So if you're going to college this coming fall, so basically next month, you should have applied for financial aid before March 2nd of this year. So that's your window from October 1st to March 2nd of every year. And you have to apply every year that you're in college. So if you're there for 4 years, you apply for financial aid for 4 times. And one time does not mean that you can go through college and get financial aid the whole time. That's really important because people sometimes don't know that.
Before we move from the slide, the one thing that I wanted to mention is we require supplemental requirements. And the reason why I'm saying this is because each university is unique, and some universities will ask you for additional paperwork. So some universities even have their own financial aid application. And it's usually much smaller than FAFSA and CSS, but it's just another set of questions they're going to ask. So the best way for you to figure out what your university or the universities you're interested in applying for want is just to go on their website. And each school usually does a great job at walking you through what they require. And always ask questions, because there's no way that just these workshops can provide you everything you need. There's going to be questions, and honestly, if you can learn how to do your own research and figure out how to answer your own questions, that will not help you just in this process, but throughout the rest of your undergrad. So definitely always just double check with your own school.
100%. That's so important. I went to community college before I transferred to Berkeley. And when I was there, I didn't really know what aid I was eligible for. So I remember emailing UC San Diego directly. And I was like, hey, so here's my citizenship status. I don't know what I qualify for. Can you help me? And they've helped me figure out what my options were. So there are admissions officers, like the admissions offices of each university are there to help you. So if you have any questions and you don't really have a counselor to go to or anyone else to go to, please just ask the universities. They get paid to help you. So that should be that's a resource that's always available. To clarify, kind of as a summary, if you're applying to UCs and Cal States, so UCs are like UCLA, Berkeley, Riverside, all 8 campuses. Cal States, there's 23 campuses. You only apply for FAFSA or the California Dream Act, okay? For private universities, it's usually a combination of FAFSA or the California Dream Act plus the CSS profile. Okay, so it's one extra step, and then any supplemental like forms that they might give you. For UCs and Cal States, the general requirement is just the first two, FAFSA or the California Dream Act, but also community colleges, same thing. There are four major factors that determine financial aid. Filing as independent versus dependent. We'll go over each of these in details. The number of people in your household, expected family contribution, and cost of attendance. And then there are also other minor factors that determine financial aid. And this is mostly for like scholarships, not like need-based financial aid. Need-based means, again, like based on how much money you or your family makes. So those minor factors include volunteering hours, what you're majoring in, your ethnicity or race, your skills, experiences, so like any leadership or community service you've done, your grades, potentially SAT scores, and so many other factors. So when you apply, when you fill out the UC application, like I said earlier, that scholarship section has like a million different like things you can check off, and some that seem super random. Like if you are a second generation descendant from like mine workers, or not mine, like coal workers in a factory, stuff like that, like very, very specific scholarships that have been set up by foundations who are looking for people of that specific background. But for financial aid that's determined by like how much money you make, these are the four major factors. So what does it mean to be independent versus dependent? So the first question is, does your family claim you as a dependent on their taxes? You should ask your mom or dad or your guardian if you don't know the answer to this. What that means is on their taxes, for let's say, so for my parents, when I was in college, when they filled out their taxes, it asked them how many children they have, and they put me and my little brother, right? So that means that I was dependent on them when I was in college. So I had to put their tax information when I was applying for financial aid, not my own, because I didn't fill out taxes. So you typically receive more aid if you're independent, though. But if you're under 18, if you're under 24 and you are considered dependent, so automatically, if you're below 24, which is most of you, if not all of you, you will be considered dependent on your family unless you're married, you're a member of the military, you're an orphan or ward of the court, an emancipated minor, you are or were homeless at some point. There is also a waiver to override these requirements in extreme circumstances. So like if something really crazy happened recently, and so your parents are no longer financially responsible for you, you can fill out a waiver and see if you will be granted independent status. So basically the way it's set up, if you're under 24 and if you don't meet any of these requirements, you are automatically a dependent. So you have to put your parents' tax information, whether or not you make your own money. I know a lot of students have their own jobs and they pay for their own stuff on your own. But if you're under 24 and you don't meet any of these requirements, unfortunately, you are still like your family's income is what will show up on financial aid applications. So that's independent versus dependent. The number of people in your household is the second factor. They will take into consideration how many siblings you have and the cost of others in your house. If anyone else in your household is also attending college. This is important because let's say your family makes $90,000, which is above the 80,000 threshold that UCs and Cal States set, right? But then let's say you have 6 people living in a $90,000 salary. That's not a lot of money that, you know, if you consider there's 6 people who are living together, and let's say out of the 6, 3 people are going to college. So they will take into consideration all of those expenses when they determine how far your income actually goes. So don't just freak out because your parents make 100,000 and you think, oh no, I'm not going to get financial aid. That might not be true. It really is dependent on so many other factors. Okay, expected family contribution. Basically, they will look at your family's household income before taxes. They will look at how much it costs to go to college, whatever college you're going to, and they will try to figure out if your family can contribute anything towards your education. It doesn't mean that they actually will. They will just look to see if they can. If your expected family contribution is pretty high, then you might have to take out loans to cover that cost. If your family expected, so EFC is pretty low, then that university will probably give you a lot more scholarships and grants to cover your education. My family's EFC was 0. Basically, that means that they didn't make enough money to contribute anything towards my education. And so I ended up getting close to a full ride at Berkeley, and then I applied for scholarships once I got there. So I graduated with no debt, and I'm super grateful that I got enough aid to cover everything. But yeah, so if that's your circumstances where your family just can't afford to send you to college, there is financial aid. Trust me. So cost of attendance just means that how much it costs to go to college. It will include tuition plus how much it's like your dorming or your apartment cost is minus your family's contribution. So like what they think you can contribute, and that will be the amount of money that you get, right? So let's say for me, to attend Berkeley, it was close to $35,000 minus my family contribution was zero. So amount of aid, I was supposed to get $35,000, but because I don't qualify for federal money, I ended up getting a little bit less. But again, I applied for scholarships, so it was fine. So I got close to full aid. So that's sort of how it works. How much money does it cost to go to college minus how much money does the college think your parents can go like pitch in towards your education, and then that will equal aid. Let us know if you have any questions about that. So what do you need to apply for financial aid? You will need this is just a very, like, there are so many other things you need, but these are the most important parts. You need your parents' federal income taxes from 2 years prior to the upcoming school year. So you need your 2018 taxes for the 2020 school year. So if you were applying, let's say before March 2nd of this year, you would need taxes from last year. If you didn't file taxes, you will need their pay stubs or any statement that shows how much money they made. So that could include the W-2, the 1099. Ask your family or your guardian. Like, you might not know if they have these things, so ask them and see what they say. Even if there are some very rare circumstances where students, so like parents don't have anything at all, like they really cannot provide anything, you should still fill out that financial aid application. Anyways, because you might still get money, and it's important that you fill out that application. But for the vast majority, most people do have taxes, so that's the first thing you should look into. If your parents don't have taxes, then their pay stubs or any other form that they have that verifies their wages, like how much money they make. Is private school expensive? I'll let Kamal talk about that.
Yes. So I know for private schools, it's very complicated. I know there's always the idea like, oh, like this private school, like Dartmouth, require like the cost to attend Dartmouth is like 80 grand or like 75 grand a year. And most private schools are around 70K. But so what ends up happening when you're a low-income student or first-generation student who's going to be attending a private schools? So many private schools have very specific resources for highly aided students. So a highly aided student, according to the University of Pennsylvania, is someone whose expected family contribution, this number you get, this is a number you get from your FAFSA, is less than $4,500. And so when you're a student who's highly aided at like university, like a private school, you're often able to access a whole bunch of other aids, which the private school can specifically provide. So a computer and laptop grant, for an example, they'll pay for like a laptop, free health insurance, they'll pay for like free interviews, they'll have like a summer/research grant opportunity for you. So you can work for a nonprofit, which doesn't pay you anything, but the university will pay you $4,000. They'll pay for like these costs for like concerts and like shows and like Broadway shows, which is something which a lot of private schools encourage students to partake in. They'll have emergency grants because they understand that you may be going to school in the middle of nowhere in like New Hampshire, but your family's back here in like California, and if you need to ever fly back for a family emergency, they'd want to accommodate you for that as well. So these are just some of the things that private schools are able to offer you. As well as something that I wish I bolded looking back now, but a free pre-college prep program. And so a lot of private schools understand that when you begin to attend a private school coming from a low-income background, you feel like you're going to be behind because you're going to be sitting next to extremely wealthy peers with experiences which are can be vastly different from yours. And a lot of private schools try to accommodate for that, providing free college prep programs where you start school a month before everyone else does, and they kind of walk you through adapting to a rigor of classes where previously you may not have had in a public school. I know for me, my calculus was terrible, even though in my high school was great. And I know when my high school, 10% high school, not a lot of people passed calculus when I attended. So for me, it was really great that I was able to attend the summer program, which helped in my calculus. So when I started my calculus class at Penn, I was able to kind of be on par with the other students. And again, I think private schools have to do this because I think there's expectations that you have access to luxury items, which most students don't. Um, but definitely look into different private schools and see what they can offer. And again, private schools mean thousands of different schools, so not every school is going to be like this. And there's huge differences between private schools as well. Again, I'm going to refer to the website that I noted before called Coalition for College. That's a list of schools that really provides great opportunities for its students. But again, each school is independent. Again, research, research, research. I wish I could offer more about this, and I think we're thinking about talking more about private schools, but they're just a different entity that I wish more students knew about, but at the same time, they're just as complicated as can be, which really makes them a daring experience.
Yeah, I didn't know any of this when I was applying to colleges out of community college. If I had known, I probably would have applied to more private universities. I'm a huge fan of the UCs. I've been doing public education for a long time and I love it, but I didn't know so much aid was offered at private schools. So this is a good, I hope you really take that into consideration. Before we do questions, please go to firstgenempowerment.com. We have a lot of resources that are available. We're also going to be rolling out newsletters with information. So please sign up for that through our website as well. If you have questions, firstgenvnhs@gmail.com is an available resource for you. It might take us a while to get back, but we promise that we will. If you are at Van Nuys High School and you want to join the first generation, the FGE, so the First Generation Empowerment Club, which is independent of me and of Deep and Kamal, like it's run by the students themselves, you can fill out that form and let them know. And then the next workshop is on Wednesday and it's personal statements. Please attend this if you're at all interested in how to start writing your essays. It's super important, especially like I said before, if you're not taking the SAT or if you don't have one on file, you now have to rely on other factors in your application, and personal statements is one of them. So those are my public service announcements. So let's do questions now. Okay, Avdeep, how do you want to do this? Do you want to start saying them out loud?
Yeah, so I have sent them in the chat to everybody as well, but I'll just go in order that they were asked. So Kamal Arabi, this is mainly for you. In the beginning, you mentioned a lot of scholarships at the very beginning of this presentation. So Kajit wants to know, from the scholarships being discussed, how many can they apply to?
All of them, probably. Okay, so sort of, right? Depends. So the UCs, for example, when you turn in the application, it will ask you to, remember I was telling you there's like affiliations that's like super random, like, oh, you're a second generation child of like coal miners or something, like something very specific like that. They let you pick, I think, a maximum of 10 affiliations. But those aren't scholarship specifically. Those are just means that you are affiliated as something. For actual scholarships that are outside of that, it's unlimited. And I know because I applied to so many scholarships. When I went to community college, I applied to 15 scholarships through Valley College, like not even outside of it. And I ended up getting like 5 of them, which was like $5,000. So that like completely doable. There, you will get a lot of rejections, but you might also end up getting a lot of yeses. So the answer is technically you can apply for unlimited number of scholarships. And the good thing is once you start applying for them, the essays you realize are kind of the same. So you can just start copy and pasting the same essay and just tweaking like the last paragraph and the first paragraph. So once you apply to a couple of scholarships, it becomes easier to apply for the next ones. I applied to 3 scholarships in one day last week because they all had the same essay. So it wasn't that much work. I just emailed everybody the same essay and was like, oh, I really want your scholarship because blah, blah, blah. I just wrote that sentence. So I highly recommend it. I hope that answered your question. The answer is technically you can apply to as many as you have the energy and capacity for.
Thank you, Rabi. Miriam asked a great question, which I already answered in the chat, but just so everybody knows, she said, do you need to apply to financial aid every year? I said, yes, you do. You do need to reapply to FAFSA, CSS, and the Dream Act every single year that you're in college in order to receive aid. And also note that your financial aid package will look different from year to year as factors in your application change. So if your parents' income changed, like that will affect the scholarship that you get. A follow-up question to that, which Kajit had, what if my family makes less than 80,000 yearly and I qualified for the Blue and Gold scholarship? which means my tuition would be fully covered for 4 years. Would I still need to reapply every year? So for people who don't know, the Blue and Gold Scholarship is, I know UC Berkeley does it. Is it a UC-wide thing?
UI thing, yeah.
It's a UC-wide thing where if your family's income is less than 80,000, then all 4 years of your tuition are covered. But in order to qualify for that, in order to get that, you still need to apply for FAFSA every single year. And your family's income would need to stay under 80K every single year in order for you to continue to qualify for the Blue and Gold. Also, even if you do qualify for the Blue and Gold, you should still apply to well, one, you need to apply to FAFSA, but also when you apply to FAFSA, even if you qualify for the Blue and Gold, you end up getting more scholarships. Like there's Cal Grants and Pell Grants, and some of them, sometimes this means you end up getting more aid than just getting your tuition paid for, which means you get paid to go to college. You just get extra money. And is there anything that Rabi and Kamal want to add, or should I read the next question?
No, I think that covered it.
Great. So Hafsa asked, do you send FAFSA and CS applications to each university to apply them to? To each university that you apply to, or just fill them out once in the system? It's a really good question. Does anybody want to take that on?
So I can take that on. So for the CSS and FAFSA, so it is one application, but you do send it to each school. So when you figure out which schools you want to apply for, each school will essentially have a code, and you can find this on the financial aid websites, and you enter that code and it'll just send the application over to your university. And I think for the UCs and the CSUs, I'm not sure if it's just one code for the entire UCs. Can someone?
It's different universities. So if you're filling out the FAFSA, the first year that you fill it out, it's like Kamal said, you just send them to all the university that you applied to. But once you're in a college, you will then, for the next 3 years, you'll let FAFSA know that you're attending this university, and then you only need to fill out again on that system, and it'll automatically send it to your university. And for UCs, it's a different code for each of the universities.
Yeah, so technically, yeah, it's one application for all, so you only apply one. Same with the actual college application. So for UCs and Cal States, you only apply one application to all the UCs, and then separately all of the Cal States. I got a question too, so and that was like around when those questions. So if someone is undocumented with their family earning less than $80,000, does school cover it or no? Yes, because your income is less than $80,000. So you're going to get the Cal Grants. If you are an undocumented student in California, so you're graduating from a California high school, you're going to get the Cal Grants. And if you don't get the Cal Grants, the school will give you some money. So you are covered. You're going to get, at the very least, you're going to get tuition. You might end up getting more than tuition and get housing as well. Okay.
Great. We have a couple more questions, but they're both non-financial aid related. I'll just say them out loud. So the first one is from Son. Do you still recommend taking the SAT this year, although most UCs do not require them? We will actually make an Instagram post about this, so follow us on IG, but I'll let Arabi give you a brief.
Okay, so we talked about this, and we were wondering what our official answer should be. It depends. So the pro to taking the SAT is other people have it on their files, right? So if someone did take it and they scored well, that's part of their application. The UCs aren't saying that they're not going to look at it at all. They're basically saying that, like, if you don't have it, that's not going to penalize you. We're not going to automatically, disqualify you from being considered for the UCs. I think you might consider not taking it if you can spend that energy and that time working on other parts of your application. So like writing really kick-ass personal statements, which honestly, like, it will take you far. Maybe working on your extracurriculars. If you have like a side hustle, like a personal like passion project, working on that, kind of developing it and then being able to write about it in your personal statements. I think those things can also like help you with your application. Just keep in mind, we don't have the answer for you, but keep in mind you are still competing with people who do have an SAT score on file. The other thing that, if you don't know this, UCs and Cal States compare your SAT score to only your high school. So like you are being compared to everybody else in your high school, not necessarily everyone in the United States. That's a good thing. Potentially if like you're like, oh, I know I'm doing really well and compared to my school. So that's something else to consider.
But we know that like SAT tests are not even being conducted right now. So don't worry if you can't take it. In that case, just focus on making the rest of your application stellar, because that's what's going to speak for you. So Last question from Son. Which community college do you think is better, Pierce or Valley? Arabi, I'm thinking this is a SoCal thing.
Yeah. It depends what you want to study. Okay. So I studied sociology. Valley College had all of the social classes that I needed. I didn't go to Pierce because I didn't drive at the time, so it was too far for me. That's honestly the reason why I went to Valley, because it was like 5 minutes away from my home. It depends. So the way you figure out if you should go to one community college over the other is to see if they offer all the classes that you need for your major. So if you're like a journalism major, Valley College is really good for journalism because they have all of the classes you need to transfer. Pierce might not. I don't know. I'm not actually sure if that's true, but I'm just saying like that's an example. So check to see if they have all the classes that you need. We're going to talk about this and how to figure out what classes you need on our community college website. Workshop. So please come to that and we'll talk more about that then. I have a question here. So I'm a rising senior. When should I apply for financial aid? Sometime between October 2020 to March. I'm not going to say second because you should not be applying the last day. I'm going to say like February, the last day of February, because you want to get it turned in before the actual deadline, which is March 2nd. So that's when you should be applying to financial aid.
Well, so I think it's just the earlier you apply, the more chances you have of getting higher aid.
That's usually only for private universities. For UCs and Cal States, it doesn't really matter when you apply as long as you turn in your application before March 2nd. That's the priority deadline. So usually I would do it like last week of February and it was fine. But for private universities, because they have a limited number of scholarships, usually like they don't have, their scholarships, it's like, okay, this year we're going to give out $5 million. So they're going to give out the $5 million generally to the people who get there first. It's called rolling admissions. UCs and Cal States don't do that. Okay, any other questions, Avdeep?
None here. Remember, guys, if you have any other questions, you can email us or you can DM us on Instagram. Our Instagram is @FirstGenEmpower. So follow us, sign up for our workshops, go to our website. Arabi?
Okay, I have 2 more questions. Sorry. They're good questions, so please just stay around for a second. So for the family income that determines how much money we can get from grants and scholarships for the family, okay, is it determined by the gross income or the net income? And the income would be joint, right? Like if my family file taxes jointly, yes. So if your parents file tax together, it will consider both of their income. That's the second question. The other one is, I believe it's their gross income. So they will look at how much money your parents, they ask for both.
I think it goes on net, my love. I think they ask for both, but so here's, my dad is a business owner, and his net, his gross usually ends up being a lot, but obviously there's expenses to take into account. So his gross is his net is always much less, and I think they consider net. Net is what you have left over.
Isn't net income? Oh, that's right. Yeah. So net is what you have after all of your additional expenses. Gross is just how much you make in total. Yeah. They will ask you for, but it should be your net income.
Your net needs to be under 80K for you to get the blue and gold.
Yeah. All right. Hopefully that clarified it. I had another question. Will someone get their tuition? Oh, sorry. I think I already answered this one. The one that was about, will someone get their tuition paid for when undocumented families make less than $80,000? And the answer is yes, you will. Again, your net income. So like how much money your parents have after they like pay for taxes and everything, it's less than $80,000. Yeah. So hopefully that was helpful. All right. Any last questions? That was it for all the questions we got. Let me look through to make sure we didn't miss any. No, I think that's it. So like I've said, what's up?
But if you have any others, make sure you email us, Instagram, DM us. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and sign up for future workshops.
Yep. See you on Wednesday. Apply for financial aid every year, please. That's my last message. Thank you all so much for coming.